Good morning. My name is Jamie Dome, and I'm currently working towards my Bachelor of Science degree in criminal psychology. And as soon as I attain that undergraduate degree, I am going to move on to obtaining my master's and my doctorate in clinical counseling. My long term career goal is to use my degree in clinical counseling to work inside of a forensic or correctional setting. I actually became interested in this field because many individuals within the criminal justice system struggle with serious mental health issues, and that includes trauma related disorders. Um, because of that, I became curious about how trauma affects behavior in prison environments and whether uh, understanding those experiences could improve treatment and rehabilitation. So, the research topic I chose for this project focuses on the psychological effects of incarceration on mental health. So, particularly the presence of post traumatic stress disorder or PTSD within prison populations. So, PTSD is a trauma related condition that can develop after individuals experience or witness highly stressful or life threatening situations. And some of the symptoms can include hypervigilance, emotional dysregulation, intrusive memories, and difficulty managing stress. Many incarcerated individuals have experienced trauma long before entering prison. So they could have had experiences like childhood abuse or exposure to violence or unstable living environments. And at the same time, the prison environment itself can introduce additional stressors, including isolation, lack of control, and exposure to violence. So, because of these factors, the research question I chose or to develop is, to what extent does PTSD contribute to violent behavior and disciplinary infractions among incarcerated individuals? So, in research, it's important to clearly distinguish between a general topic and a research question. So, a general topic simply identifies the subject area being explored, where a research question narrows that subject into a specific problem that can be studied using systematic research methods. So, developing a focused research question helps researchers determine what data they need to collect and which research methods will be most appropriate, as notated in the book Introduction to Research Less Fright, More Insight. So, to better understand this topic, I actually reviewed quite a few scholarly sources that provided background information on trauma and behavior in correctional settings. One of the important studies that was conducted was by Facer Irwin and colleagues, and that examined trauma and PTSD among sentenced prisoners inside of the United Kingdom. And in their study, researchers followed incarcerated individuals over time to examine whether trauma symptoms were associated with violent behavior in prison. The results of their study suggested that individuals who experienced higher levels of PTSD symptoms were more likely to engage in violent behavior in prison. Um, and the findings highlight the possibility that untreated trauma may influence behavioral outcomes within correctional institutions. Another article that helped explain the issue was written by Mazur and Arai, and their work discusses two theoretical perspectives that researchers often use to explain behavior in prison environments: the importation model and the deprivation model. So, the importation model suggests that individuals um, bring personal experiences, psychological traits, and life histories with them when they enter prison, just like every other human being does in any situation we put ourselves in. Um, However, incarcerated individuals also bring trauma like past exposure to violence and existing mental health conditions. So the deprivation model, on the other hand, focuses on how the conditions of incarceration itself can create psychological strain, such as isolation, loss of personal freedom, and exposure to institutional violence all increase stress and emotional distress. When these two perspectives are considered together, they provide a helpful framework to understanding how both personal history and institutional conditions may contribute to behavioral outcomes among incarcerated individuals. So, in addition to these scholarly sources, course materials emphasize the importance of conducting research using empirical evidence. According to Crawford, researchers should rely on systematic observation and measurement and analysis rather than assumptions and personal opinion. Proper citation practices are also essential for ethical research, as emphasized by the American Psychological Association. Now, based on what I've learned and researched in this course, the method I chose to investigate my research question is the quantitative prospective cohort design. Now, in this type of study, researchers measure certain characteristics in a group of participants and then follow those participants over a time to be observing their outcomes. Now, in this proposed study, PTSD symptom severity would be the independent variable, which is a factor believed to influence behavior. The dependent variable would be violent disciplinary infractions recorded within prison. Other factors such as age, criminal history, and sentence length could also be included as control variables in order to reduce the influence of alternative explanations. One of the advantages of this research method is that it allows researchers to examine relationships between variables over time, meaning PTSD symptoms first and then observing later behavior helps establish a clear sequence of events. And another strength is that disciplinary infractions can be measured using institutional records, which helps provide objective data. Now, this research method also has limitations, and one of those limitations is that observational research cannot prove definitive causation. In correctional settings, inmates may be transferred to different facilities during the study period, which could affect the consistency of data collection. And in the research world, we call that attrition. These strengths and limitations are closely related to the research concepts of reliability and validity. Now, reliability refers to the consistency of a measurement across repeated observations. Using standardized PTSD assessments and official disciplinary records could help improve reliability in this study. Now, validity refers to whether the research design actually measures what it is intended to measure. The internal validity focuses on whether the observed relationship between variables is accurate and not influenced by other factors. External validity refers to whether the findings can be generalized to other populations or settings. And construct validity is also important because the measurement of PTSD must accurately reflect the diagnostic criteria, such as those described in the Diagnostic Statistic Manual of Mental Health Disorders, or the DSM-5. So if this research project were actually conducted, the first step would be involving obtaining approval from an institutional review board, or an IRB, just to ensure that the study meets ethical standards. And then researchers would then recruit participants from correctional facilities and obtain informed consent. Now, participants could complete a baseline PTSD assessment at the beginning of the study, along with demographic and background information. And then over the next several months, researchers would monitor disciplinary records to identify incidents of violent behavior. And yep, there are several challenges that could occur during data collection. And some incarcerated individuals may hesitate to disclose personal trauma information due to the stigma or distrust of the researchers. So Some trauma experiences may be underreported if participants feel uncomfortable discussing them. Now, once the data were collected, researchers could analyze the results using statistical techniques such as Pearson correlation and multiple regression analysis. These methods would help determine whether PTSD symptoms significantly predict violent disciplinary infractions. So, as we near the end, the research question guiding this project asks whether PTSD contributes to violent behavior among incarcerated individuals. And based on the literature and course materials, a quantitative prospective cohort design appears to be the most appropriate method for examining this relationship. Although there are limitations to this approach, understanding how trauma influences behavior in correctional environments could help improve trauma-informed treatment and rehabilitation programs. Ultimately, research in this area has the potential to improve both mental health treatment and institutional safety within correctional systems. Thank you so much for your time.